Putin's assumption then was that all the Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine were going to rally to him, and he actually found out. He actually didn't learn his lesson the first time around, because there was vast opposition to any kind of invasion at that time.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. It seems the Israeli government is finding ways to reach new lows, now routinely attacking funeral processions. This is video of their attack on the funeral procession of Shireen Abu Akleh.
اعتداء همجي على جنازة الشهيدة شيرين أبو عقلة.
The man who held the corner of the coffin, even while he was being beaten, was Amro Abu Khudair. He's being nicknamed the Coffin Protector. But he was arrested by the Israelis and has been put in an underground tiny cell. On April 22nd, Walid Sharif was shot with a rubber-coated steel bullet in the Al-Aqsa compound. He later died of his injuries. Israeli authorities said he must have fallen. Al Jazeera reports that police attacked mourners in his funeral procession. There were 71 people injured. This is some of the video of the attack. On May 15th, when Palestinians remember the Nakba, the catastrophe when they were expelled from their land, there was a march and rally in New Haven.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Earlier, there were speeches.
I stand with you tonight as a Palestinian American student whose heart aches for her people in the land that she is not allowed to visit. I stand here tonight because what is happening to the Palestinian people is a crime. And I stand here today to honor the resistance, courage, and steadfastness of the Palestinian people. Today is more than a memorial day. Today is more than a memorial day because the Nakba is still continuing today. We are here not only to mourn the catastrophe of 1948 in Palestine, but to celebrate the resistance as well. The Nakba continues, and so must the resistance. The resistance against the expulsion and displacement from Palestine, against the colonization and against Zionism, is not only the resistance of a rock against a tank or of a consumer's boycott against profiteers of war. It is also the resistance against the Zionist narrative, the writing of history by the alleged victors, a narrative that is dominant in classrooms, in books, in newspapers, and everywhere in our country. The Palestinian struggle and the solidarity with it also means breaking this narrative, and with it the silence of 1948. The continued Nakba is not a war. This is not a dispute between equals. There is no balance needed in how we talk about this. Only one side has dispossessed the other. Only one side is occupying. Only one side is denying the other basic human rights. Balance is not missing from this moment we are witnessing, but the truth is. I stand here today to call for a Yale and statewide campaign of boycott, divestment, and international sanctions in the name of human rights and international law towards the Palestinian people. And I stand with you in this place, and at this moment of solidarity, I hold within me the pain of Palestinian suffering, which compels me to speak out for Gaza, for East Jerusalem, for the Palestinians in Israel, for the West Bank, and for the millions of Palestinians still in exile from their land. I call upon our non-Palestinian comrades, continue to educate yourself and inform yourself. Question the writing of history. The critical examination of the hegemonic narrative is necessary for the political understanding of the Palestinian question. I'm very glad to take to the streets with you today and to march with you down this long road of international solidarity. Thank you.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for Israel's crimes.
No more money for Israel's crimes.
I actually kind of wanted to jump on what Ruqayya was saying, which is that whenever you see a Palestinian who's about to be arrested, they always seem to be smiling, as it is to celebrate their resistance. And I think that is also something to be celebrated. Next, we'll have Javier, immigrant and indigenous rights organizer from the Samia Collective.
¿Cómo están, compas? How are you doing, my friends? Is it kind of hot here or no, or what? I'm just gonna say this in Spanish and then I'll repeat it in English for the compas who don't speak it, but if you follow, please follow. Compañeros y compañeras, mi corazón lo siente cerca hoy que nos reunimos nuevamente en solidaridad con el pueblo palestino y los pueblos del mundo. Me llamo Javier y vivo en New Haven, pero vengo de un pueblo en Oaxaca, México. Siento cerca de mí la lucha de los pueblos palestinos, porque mi gente también ha sido desplazada y buscamos volver a casa, aunque sea para ser enterrados allá. El día de hoy me gustaría compartir con ustedes unas palabras que escribí para los compas que no volvieron a casa en vida y se nos adelantaron a esa casa a las que todos vamos eventualmente. A ti, que te buscó la muerte desde pequeño, que caminaste haciendo camino con machete en mano, andando, siempre andando, nos enseñaste a caminar. Vuelven a casa, los caídos vuelven a casa, los que nos quedamos vamos buscando una reunión, un encuentro, by any means necessary. Volver a casa no es volver a este estado de utopía que la imaginación histórica describe. Volver a casa es, en palabras de Ricardo Flores, nuestra tierra y libertad. Gracias. And now I'm gonna do a very poor translation of this, and please forgive me for my second language, but I'll do it from the heart for you, my friends. My comrades, I feel you close today as we stand in solidarity with the peoples of Palestine and the peoples in resistance around the world. My name is Javier and I live in New Haven, Quinnipiac land, but I come from a town in Oaxaca, Mexico. I feel close to the Palestinian people because my people has also been displaced, and we also seek to return home, even if it is only to go be buried there. Today, I would like to share with you a few words that I wrote for the compas who did not return home in life and went ahead of us to that house to which we all eventually go. Here we go. For those whose steps were followed by death since childhood, for those who walk forward, making a path, machete in hand, moving always forward, moving always. You taught us to walk. They go back home. The fallen come home. Those of us who stayed keep looking for a meeting, an encounter, by any means necessary. Going home is not going back to this state of utopia that the historical imagination describes. Going home is, in the words of Ricardo Flores, our land and the freedom. Thank you. And when I say land, you guys say back. Land, back, land, back, land, back, land, back, by any means necessary. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to have Francesca, one of the organizers of this rally, speak.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to give a few words before we all march, just to ground us in why we're here today. We're here today because New Haven stands with Palestinian people and with all people everywhere who are struggling against imperialism, against colonialism, against capitalism, against dispossession, and against oppression. And even though we're up against the full force of empire with nothing but ourselves, our solidarity does not stop. We have been intimidated, we have been harassed, we have been censored, we have been blacklisted, we have been fired from our jobs, we have been called terrorist sympathizers, we have been smeared as anti-Semitic, our Jewish comrades have been called self-hating Jews, politicians have passed laws to criminalize our sacred right to boycott the settler colonial occupation. And that is still nothing compared to what our brothers and sisters in Palestine are facing every day. The demolition of homes, the mass expropriation of land, the targeted assassinations of journalists, of healthcare workers, the airstrikes that have wiped out entire families paid for by this fascist state. But despite the intimidation, despite the attempts to pacify us with the empty language of peace without justice, despite the violence, despite the blacklisting, despite the harassment, we are still here because after 74 years, we have not given up on the dream of a free Palestine. And although the Zionist occupation is strong, our love for liberation is stronger. Our love for liberation has toppled kings and dictators. Our love for liberation has liberated countries from colonial occupations before. We have taken down empires before, and we will take down the imperialist US empire and the settler colonial state of Israel with it. So we're here fighting today like we've been fighting for the last 74 years, and like we will be fighting again and again and again until we see a free Palestine within our lifetime.
Hooray! Hooray!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine! More about the rally and march next week, but before we move on, I want to show this attractive way these young women are showing support for Palestine. Now to Ukraine, to a forum that was held about Ukraine and Syria, resistance to Putin's wars of destruction. Today we'll hear from Alex Kuzma. He is the executive director of the Ukrainian Catholic Education Fund and is often the spokesperson for Ukrainians in Connecticut.
Just to let you know, this is the university that I work with is in Western Ukraine. It's in Lviv, near the Polish border. So that what we've seen is that our university has become a virtual refugee center now for a lot of the folks fleeing from the fighting in Mariupol and Kharkiv and even Kyiv. Thank you. And just the next one. I'll go to the next slide there. This was actually, I often go back to this photo and it haunts me in many ways because this was a rally that happened in Mariupol back in 2014 during the first attack by Russian troops on eastern Ukraine after they had annexed Crimea. Putin's assumption then was that all the Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine were going to rally to him, and he actually found out. He actually didn't learn his lesson the first time around because there was vast opposition to any kind of invasion at that time, and this was a scene from this mass rally that they had in Mariupol. I'm often haunted by this image because I think, how many of these people are still alive, how many of these people are in underground shelters, how many of them have been deported to Russia, going through the filtration camps that Putin has established. And as you could see from the little image on the left-hand side, I mean, they were already thinking of Putin as a Hitlerian fascist character. And I remember one of the articles that came out at that time was that even elderly ladies, the babushki, the grandmothers were laying anti-tank mines, not mines, but anti-tank barriers to protect the city. So just the next slide. Thank you, Stanley. We're really at a very painful inflection point in Ukraine right now, because we're already seeing a lot of the elements of genocide, the bombing of civilian populations, especially in Kharkiv and Mariupol, which are two of the most Russian-speaking cities. So to the degree that Putin was using that as a pretext to invade, it's kind of absurd, because he's actually reserved his most ruthless attacks for those cities. So it kind of harkens back to the Vietnam era, where people used to say we had to destroy the village in order to save it. And this is kind of Putin's mentality right now, that he has to destroy these cities that have basically defied him. And so in many ways, Mariupol reminds me of the terrible tragedy of Aleppo and Guernica and other cities that were devastated by fascist attacks. So they're leveling a lot of these cities to rubble. We've all seen the coverage from Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka, where there have been mass murders already documented. And the mayor, Boychenko, the mayor of Mariupol, has said that he's based on his evidence and statistics, it could be as many as 20,000 people have already been killed. And that's just over a 2-month period. So it's really a ghastly loss of life when we think about it. And also, there have been growing reports about mass rape and torture, mothers and fathers being forced to watch their daughters being raped in public, which is, you can imagine, just a devastating trauma for anybody to live through. I did receive some very moving information today that there's a group of psychiatrists from the Yale Child Studies Center that are planning to go to Ukraine to actually meet with some of the children that were traumatized and raped during this time. So there will be a direct Connecticut connection with some of these individuals. But the other really terrifying thing is that there's this attempt at forced deportation of civilians and children to Russia, that basically they all need to be reindoctrinated. They're all, children as young as 5 years old are crazy Nazis. And so they need to be, deprogrammed from their Ukrainian patriotism. And so there's already been pretty serious reports of children being put on trains and sent all the way to Vladivostok, where they're going to, they're forced to attend schools where they're learning Russian and trying to be disabused of their Ukrainian roots. So, and on top of that, you have this constant drumbeat from Putin and from his major propagandists, basically, Dugin and Solovyov and many of his, Margarita, Simonyan, the folks that are kind of the main mouthpieces for Putin, are constantly demonizing Ukrainians as being some kind of horrific people. And this is a country that, for 30 years had made peace with all of its neighbors, had eliminated its nuclear arsenal. So it should be the darling of the international peace community, because this was the third or fourth largest nuclear power in the world, had it kept all of its nuclear weapons, and it decided to disband the entire nuclear arsenal in the interests of world peace. And on top of that, they've maintained peaceful relations with their former enemies, Poland, Turkey, the Crimean Tatars. So this notion that somehow Ukraine was provoking, and actually Ukraine was even the largest trading partner for Russia, so that even in terms of Russia's national interests, it doesn't make sense that this war would be launched. Next slide, and I'll just go through these quickly, because I want to make sure that Nadal is, I don't want to shortchange my colleague here on the next thing. And so, we really are, even though at the very early stages of this war, we're already deeply concerned about the potential for a genocide, partly because of the statements that have come out of the Kremlin that they're basically planning to somehow, destroy the whole country if they're allowed to do it. And so Ukrainians are not strangers to genocide. Actually, the gentleman who originated the term genocide was Raphael Lemkin, who's a Jewish Ukrainian lawyer from Lviv, the city where our university is based. And back in the 40s, he originated this term. And he said one of the first classic cases of genocide was the Ukrainian famine, the Holodomor, which was Stalin's attempt to crush resistance from the Ukrainian countryside. And so he confiscated all of the foodstuffs from a vast area in eastern and southern Ukraine, all the way down to Odessa province and all the way up to Sumy and Chernihiv. My father-in-law actually was one of the children that was sent to Odessa He was living in Poltava and would have probably starved to death, but he was shipped out by his astute parents to save his life. But this was a horrific famine. And this is one reason why the Ukrainians are fighting so tenaciously against Russia, because they have every expectation that should Russia dominate Ukraine, that there would be a repetition of this kind of carnage. And then we know the Armenian genocide, the Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan, the Syrian civil war also. I'm not even sure if these are accurate figures now. In Syria, they're probably up to 400,000, but these are monstrous death tolls that really need to be considered. So just the next slide, if I may. The most chilling thing that just came out recently was on April 3rd, RIA Novosti, which is one of the official government news bureaus, issued a statement that was really devastating in the sense that they basically said that they're prepared to kill, if necessary, a majority of Ukrainians that remain in the country. So you're looking at, out of a country of 42 million people, their intent seems to be to kill as many as 20 to 22 to 24 million Ukrainians, if need be, by their agenda. And the rest that they plan to put into Cambodian Khmer Rouge type of resettlement camps or reindoctrination camps. So we can expect that there would be, massive abuse there, and, torture and abuse and additional executions. And then also, besides the labor camps, they're planning to send children to Russia in large numbers. And basically the name Ukraine, they claim, needs to disappear. It's an unreal thing, even though there's 35 million people in Ukraine that speak Ukrainian and another 5 million that speak it outside the country. And this is a country that's had a very rich culture lasting over 1,000 years. The agenda that's been now stated is that this country has no right to exist, and this culture and this people have no right to exist as who they are.
By now you've probably seen the new George W. Bush gaffe, his mistake at saying that the Russian invasion of Iraq was unjust. But it's worth watching those few seconds over again.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia, and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway, 75.
That's called a Freudian slip, when something that's on your mind comes out accidentally. I want to go back to another time that George Bush was laughing, this time in 2004, a year after the start of his invasion of Iraq. An invasion supposedly to destroy Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Bush was talking and giving a speech at the Radio and Television News Correspondents Association. He decided to joke about his military not being able to find any WMD in Iraq. So he showed slides of himself doing a mock search of the Oval Office looking for WMD, saying things such as, "Those weapons of mass destruction have got to be here somewhere." "Nope, no weapons over there," he said laughingly, "maybe under here." I can't find the full video of this, just a few seconds from a documentary film called Body of War.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
The film Body of War was produced by legendary TV magazine host Phil Donahue. It was shown in New Haven for a special meeting of Promoting Enduring Peace in 2013. The film is about Thomas Young, who enlisted in the military right after 9/11, was sent to Iraq, and was shot there after just 5 days. He was paralyzed in the waist for the rest of his life. I want to go back to that trailer and show you a couple seconds just before Bush's joke.
And get so upset about all the lies that they were telling.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
That was Thomas Young in the hospital-type bed. Donohue's camera operator had filmed Young watching Bush's joke. At our meeting in New Haven, I asked Donohue about it.
That was actually on the screen at the time that I was there, because it was, and what shocked me, it was not only the live telecast of the White House Correspondents' Center that night. They reran the Bush jokes, and that was real. That was Thomas. I mean, you have to be a fence post to think that this is funny.
By 2004, hundreds of American soldiers had already died in Iraq, and thousands of Iraqis. During Bush's second term, thousands of Americans died in Iraq. The fact that no WMD had been found, or that they lied about the WMD so they could start the war, didn't bother Bush one bit. Thus, he could joke about it. Thomas Young did not last much longer. He died the next year, reportedly in great pain. He was 34 years old. Officially, 4,491 U.S. soldiers died in Bush's war in Iraq. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.